Hola, Cleyvis.
Hola, Ramon.
Welcome to the first episode of Buen Provecho. I'm so happy to have you here.
This is such a privilege. Thank you for having me. I feel so honored to be the first one.
Yeah, I mean, when I reached out to Angie Abreu from Dominican Writers, and she told me you have to check out the Grand Paloma Resort, read it, and hit up Cleyvis Natera. So first, I just want to introduce you to the Unchin audience. Cleyvis Natera has written 2 books and plenty of short stories, essays. The first book is Neruda on the Park, an amazing story set in New York City. And then this book, which you're on tour for, the Grand Paloma Resort. It's a wonderful book if you're in the mood for an epic, scaled down to a 7-day story, full of tension, drama, conflict. I couldn't put the book down. It was so good. So thank you so much for writing these stories. I'm so excited to just talk to you and see what your process is like.
Yeah, well, it's like I said, it's a real pleasure to be here, and I'm so grateful that we're doing an hour of books because I have such a deep relationship with this beautiful bookstore and the people of this neighborhood. So it couldn't be a better setting, and I'm so excited to talk to you because I know that you are an aspiring writer, and I know that you're in school, and so I love to teach and I love to write. So this is just terrific.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's a really good segue. When did you start writing? When did you start teaching? Um, and how do you find like that they intersect? So, like me teaching and writing, they feed each other, but I'm always curious how other people feel about it.
Yeah, I mean, I started writing stories in college when I took a creative writing class, a freshman year. But I feel like I've always been a storyteller. I grew up with a family of tias, mi madre, mi abuela. Everybody was always really active, like dynamic in a way that I think is culturally specific for us.
Yeah.
And so I grew up with like what I consider to be a really rich storytelling culture, even though we didn't have a lot of books laying around.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I became an avid reader in junior high school. I mean, I started reading like a crazy person in 7th grade, and then I never stopped. So by the time I got to college, I was like, oh, I want to try this. I want to try it. And can I tell you, I was the worst. I was writing like Stephen King, fan fiction pretty much, and I wanted to write about vampires because I love that
Awesome.
rise, and so the first few short stories I wrote were just terrible.
Yeah.
But I could tell right away there's something so magical about living inside your imagination. And I got so much satisfaction out of like writing it, back then we were just starting to have computers. So a lot of what I was writing was by hand when I was in college. And yeah, like I was telling you before, I actually had an opportunity to teach because one of my teachers invited me to teach during a summer program.
Yeah.
I was an HEOP student, which is an opportunity program, and I was a tutor for one of those summers, and the English teacher asked me if I wanted a chance to teach. And, when you get in front of a classroom and things get inverted where like you have an opportunity to connect to students, I just found that to be a really transformative moment for me.
Yeah.
And so I just remember thinking then, I can't wait until I actually can do this, can write my books and can teach about writing.
That's
Even though
awesome.
I imagine it would be a long time before that came to be.
That's awesome. And then did you do your MFA after, like right after? Was there a pause?
Yeah, there was a bit of a pause. I graduated from college, came back home right here to 133rd Street, where my mom still lives, and I started working. I worked in publishing for a year, and then, like, about a year after that, I decided to apply to graduate school. And so I got into graduate school, and I started my MFA program just 2 years after that.
Cool.
At that point, I would say I was probably like 23 or 24. And that's when I started NYU. And by that point, I had started working at an insurance company,
Mm.
and I worked full time the entire time I went to graduate school.
Would you like to start talking about the book?
Yeah, let's do it.
So from the first page, I was hooked. I like couldn't put the book down. It starts off really strong with a dying child. And I just like got so invested in the characters, what they're concerned with, how they're trying to deal with these consequences to their actions. What was your approach to history? The Parsi massacre. Did you know that like that was a priority for you, learning the history, thinking about history for the characters, um, and how you wanted to write that history?
Yeah, I mean, I thank you first of all. I'm so glad that you were able to like kind of get hooked into the book right away
So
because it was
good.
a big risk, starting a book with a child who is like on the cusp of death for me felt like the stakes couldn't get higher, but then I also knew that it was a big risk because there are some people that when confronted with anything to do with children and cruelty are sometimes turned off and put the book down. They don't even wait to see what's the purpose of it.
Yeah.
But I know that for me, like the stakes had to be really high. And I wanted a reader to fall into this world and right away understand that it's a book about survival. And so it's the survival of a town. If you have a tourist child who gets sick, it puts everything at risk, the livelihood of the people who work there. And really, just for some of these people, it's like their only lifeline. And so I wanted the stakes to be really high. And it sounds like, based on your reading, it paid off because you stuck with
Oh my
it.
God. Not only that, like I feel like another thought that I had reading this, it feels like such a well-oiled machine where every part was really important. Like
Mm.
the fact that we start off that high is not just like, oh, I'm gonna hook my readers in and then, do something else. Like that decision with Elena and the child really drove the rest of the book in a way that like we just kept cascading and falling forward.
Yeah. I mean,
And
it was one of the things that I was thinking about, honestly, was like, how do I create a world where the stakes are so high and the suspense is like taut so that when I do introduce the background of the town and the history between the Dominican Republic and Haiti, which is very fraught,
yeah.
I was thinking a lot about creating a world where like by the time you get to that part, which could feel like for some people that maybe aren't Dominican or aren't as interested in Caribbean literature, and honestly for our own people that I feel like sometimes we have a hard time talking about the uglier parts of our history.
Yeah.
I just wanted to make it so that you would become so invested in the characters that by the time that I got to the Parsley Massacre, by the time that we get to this kind of what I consider to be a mostly hidden history of Dominican Republic, where like there were black people, right? Like enslaved and freed people from the United States of America that went to the Dominican Republic and made lives there. And both the Parsley Massacre and this history of, this ship that traveled in the 1800s to the Dominican Republic were things that I learned about largely through literature.
Yeah.
And so it became really imperative for me if for the first book that I'm writing that is set in the Dominican Republic, for it to be about the things that I think are the most critical.
Yeah.
Present day tourism, and then the past, which is colonialism, and how does colonialism kind of intersect with the present, and like what are those kinds of truly relevant parts of history. So I wanted all of it to come through each of those characters. And
Yeah.
the protagonists are Laura and Elena. And anything that happens in this book had to be connected to them, whether it be the history, their personal history, like you said, or the history of the town.
To me, that's one of the most important reasons why I read literature is to like try to keep that culture like resonating within me. So thank you.
Well, you're welcome. I mean, I started writing the Grand Paloma Resort during the pandemic, and it was such a surreal experience because I live in Montclair, New Jersey,
Mm.
which is economically very diverse, but it's mostly like a middle class neighborhood, suburban neighborhood. And it's right outside New York City. I mean, we're like 30 minutes away from New York,
Yeah.
from like my parents and my family and my aunts. And I have to tell you that it was really wild because nobody was getting sick in Montclair. And there was even like pressure from parents to reopen the schools because
Mm.
they felt like there was no crisis. And meanwhile, in Washington Heights and in the Bronx, where my family lives, thousands of people were dying from the pandemic, right? From COVID. And so, one of the things that became really imperative to me when I started writing this book was thinking about how I could use the Dominican Republic as a foil to really talk about class inequality. I
Yeah.
mean, it's one of those things that we really I think in the United States, it becomes more and more difficult to talk about class and to talk about like what are the drivers that can impact our humanity, like the quality of our lives. And I think it's just becoming so divisive. And so there was a part of me that I think because I was dealing honestly with two realities, my family and then my reality because I'm in an in a middle class neighborhood, that it became to me like almost like un puente, to say we can talk about difficult things. I'm really interested in thinking about hotels and resorts and tourism because I'm a tourist, like I
Yeah.
travel all the time. I love traveling the world. And so for me, it became like this way that I could connect the things that I care about deeply and that I think about with a lot of like obsession and just dramatize it for like a story. And so
Yeah.
so many of those concerns for me became really like, let's think about how I can write about the place where I am, but like put it inside of something where like people pick up the book and might not even realize that I'm really talking about the United States.
Yeah, yeah. I felt that. I mean, the tension, yeah, there's so much to talk about there. The tension, the juxtaposition of let's say New Jersey with New York City and just like the only a river dividing.
Yeah.
Um, there was so much use of juxtaposition, just like the contrast between two different things and putting them against each other, right?
Mm.
I think the ultimate metaphor is Haiti and Dominican Republic, right?
Yes.
We have the resort here, and it's this beautiful thing, well oiled, money is coming in and out, and then you have tents with like Haitian laborers right outside, and then you have like la casitas where the laborers could afford a little bit better lifestyles, right? Like right there, and they're all trying to keep this machine alive that depends on them. So there's always, I feel like, even like there's always just like two things contrasting to each other, and I was curious about how much of that was like part of your process, like putting two things together. We even have like the sisters, which I thought was so cool. The Vargas sisters on one side,
Yeah.
and then the Moreno sisters on the other.
Yeah.
Um, how much of that was part of your process, like putting these two like right next to each other?
Yeah, I mean, so much of it was to me about contrasting and also creating like optimism and hope. Because, when I think about the Dominican Republic and Haiti, I was really thinking about siblings. Like, the fact is that these relationships are really difficult, but neither one of them can choose to ignore the other because they're bound. They're
Yeah,
bound by the land, they're bound by soil, it's like the flesh that it's our family. And so I was thinking a lot about how I could create in the two characters, Laura and Elena, the same kind of sense we get. These two sisters love each other, but there's like a lot of resentment between the two of them. And there's also because, they lost their parents. I mean, the mother, that died by suicide when Laura was very young. She was 14 and her younger sister was 4. So Laura takes this mother role for her younger sister. And I thought it was really important to then show how, because of Laura's labor and her effort working in the hotel, she was able to get her younger sister this better life. Pero como siempre pasa, you end up with a younger sister who then grows up disconnected from the realities of like how difficult it is to be in their social
yeah,
class. She's growing up in a hotel, and even though she's a babysitter and she works too, she's just exposed to a completely different way of thinking. So I wanted to create for the two sisters, first of all, that contrast, of you could be of the same place, you could have the same desire, which both sisters want to leave the resort, they want to leave the Dominican Republic. But the way they go at it is so different because Elena believes that they have an obligation to everyone around them. She believes that they should be trying to uplift their community, both the Haitian community and the other workers in the resort that are Dominican. And so, yeah, so I was thinking a lot about that contrast, first of all, and I wanted that to be the driver.
yeah,
Then I was thinking about this sense of hopefulness and optimism that I have in my life. And I was like, how do I create for these two sisters like a map so that they could see that in the future, even though their relationship is really fraught and difficult in the present, there's like a model for how you could be better sisters, And so you have the Vargas sisters, which are these two tourists that come to the resort every summer. And they're Spanish women who have retired and became expats in the Dominican Republic.
yeah.
And so these two sisters, you know, they just love each other and they go on vacation all the time. They run a business together. And so I wanted for these two young women to have a model of these. Y todas son afros. I mean, they're both, you know, they're the Afro Spanish women that are coming every summer, and then they're the Afro Dominicanas. So for me, it was also really important to kind of create that path to say there is, it might be difficult, but there is a way in which, like, through repair, we could create relationships that are nourishing and fulfilling.
Yeah, when they were on the page, they always were smiling at each other, and there was like always something that they knew that we didn't know.
Yes.
That I found so playful at first, just like this sort of like, what's up with them? And then we would get lines like Laura like kind of admire them, right? Like
Mm,
the way that there's two sisters on her side, her and Elena, and then you have them two.
mm,
Uh, that like I kind of if you map it out throughout the book they kind of were like mirrors
mm,
to Laura and her journey. And her journey is one, well, for Elena too, of survival,
mm,
right? And also trying to keep the status quo alive. Like
mm.
right, like she is always trying to maintain like this sort of balance of trying to stay a great employee at this resort.
Yes.
One, so that Elena could keep going to school and like eventually go to college somewhere nice.
Yes.
Two, maybe that she could go up to C-suite,
Mhm.
right, and like elevate her position.
Yes.
Um, but every time that she tries to that, it feels like she's sacrificing something of
Mm,
herself, right? That Elena prioritizes. While
mm,
Elena's prioritizing community, it feels a lot of times that she's prioritizing individualism when in fact it's also for her sister,
mm,
for her community. And I just love how complicated you set up and like how layered these characters felt, where it's like it can be two things at once for
mm,
every character. And so when I kept reading it, it felt kind of tragic because you
mm,
really feel Laura trying really hard and then losing grip on what can she do. And anytime that she makes a decision, there's always someone of her community saying, "You're losing it. Like,
yeah.
I can't, like figure out who you are anymore."
Yes.
And to me, that was like really like emotionally like, oh man, I feel a lot in my stomach right now, just because you're in her perspective, you're seeing her try, um, and for most of the book, it feels like she's failing.
Yes.
How was that writing for you? Because for me as a reader, I like at points felt like I was gonna be at tears, you know? Yeah.
That's the best compliment, Ramon. 'Cause I feel like so much of what I wanted the reader to experience is like the relentlessness of being in a work environment that is toxic.
Yeah.
And you know, you can feel like seduced by a work environment that rewards this kind of prioritization because that's what happens in corporate America, right? That's what happens with capitalism is that the more that you turn your back against, you know, your family, your community, like the more that you really view yourself and your individualism as like exceptionalism, that is like the path that has kind of been laid out
Mm.
in most jobs for success. And so I really wanted to create in Laura this sense that we have as readers receiving her story, that she drank the corporate Kool-Aid.
Oh yeah.
Like she is someone that's all in with like Paloma Enterprises. This is like a huge conglomerate. They have hotels all over the world. There is like a very clearly laid out path that she sees that will lead to her freedom. And so for Laura, you know, she's someone that grew up in un campo. The schools that she attended aren't even like viewed as legitimate.
Yeah.
And so she doesn't have the kind of opportunities that she's created for her sister to have a path to freedom through education. And so that was like her number one priority was she wants to create a path so that her sister doesn't have to be in the service industry. At the same time, though, because she really does believe in this corporation, she is willing to do whatever it takes. I mean, she follows the rules to the T. And sometimes that does mean that there's like this kind of tension between her community and herself and like the kind of choices she has to make.
Yeah.
So I really wanted, that was very intentional because I felt like I wanted the reader to be in her shoes. And she's a very complicated character because we do see her make unforgivable decisions when it comes to the well-being of others, to protect the hotel, to protect her sister. And I just wanted to show that tension that I think is a tension that lives inside most of us when we realize that the workplace wasn't really made for us.
Yeah. Yeah, it was so beautiful. It was so heartbreaking. Especially because I feel like the way it starts off was seeing her with her sister, trying to
Mm,
help her sister out. Like that's how we start. So already I'm already attached to Laura. I'm already attached to Elena.
mhm,
But then you complicate those relationships right away.
mhm.
Um, and I don't know. I just felt like I was really in your hands. Like, oh, like Cleyvis has me right here in her palms. Because they argue a lot, these sisters. There's so
Mhm.
much care.
Yeah.
But it also felt so realistic of like Laura who's sacrificing a lot to try
Mhm.
to do something for her sister. And you could really feel that she's stepping up as a mother. I mean, just that emotional wound that they both share,
Mhm.
where she had to step up at 14
Mhm.
to help her sister find the place at 4 years old. How can you
Mhm.
not,
Mhm.
right? Um, and there's resentment there a little
Mhm.
bit. Elena feels like there's also just like, hey, I love you, but like stop doing stuff for me. Like I don't need all this.
Yeah.
And by the end of the book, you really feel that conversation. That conversation at the end. I don't want to spoil or give away too much, but it was like, oh man, I'm so happy that this is the way things are going.
Mhm.
Um, how was that arc? Like, did you know where things were gonna go? Writing their story, like, are you a plotter? Did you know like, okay, this is how they're gonna start,
Mhm.
and this is how they're gonna end, or did it just kind of come to you where it's like you were just following something?
Yeah, I mean, I'm so glad you're asking about this because my experience writing my first book and my second book were so different.
Hmm.
With Neruda on the Park, it was a 15-year journey where I went from writing a book in my graduate program that never even saw the light of day
Yeah.
to then switching for Neruda on the Park and writing this book that I thought was more relevant to what I was living, which was growing up in Harlem, gentrification, like all of the kind of challenges that our communities face. But it was a 15-year journey from first sentence to publication. And what was so crazy about the Grand Paloma Resort is that I sold that book before I finished writing it.
Oh.
Like I sold it as a proposal. And so what that means is that I had to write an outline and I had to do some sample chapters. Fortunately for me, I had been writing the book as a collection of short stories from the pandemic. So by the time I sold it in 2023, I was really familiar with these characters. So yeah, I had a plot, like I had, an outline of the book. But
Mm.
once you start writing the book, the narrative really takes over. My original idea was that the book was going to be about Pablo and Vida, and they
Mm.
were going to be the protagonists, and it was going to be a love story. But once I started writing the book, it became very clear to me that the most combustible relationship was the two sisters, and that they were the true protagonists. And so, what I knew when I started out with this book was that I wanted to write a book that was really exploring the tension that comes into a family unit when there's like a corporate or a labor interest that just gets in the way.
Yeah.
Because both of them work for a company and they see it really differently, right? I wasn't 100% sure about how the relationship would develop, except that I did know that I wanted it to be like a hopeful ending. And so it became really difficult because these two women could not be at more odds with each other.
Yeah.
So I was like, how am I going to get these two women, like realistically, to a hopeful place in 1 week?
Yeah.
Because the whole book happens in 7 days. And at the beginning, it's very hopeless, I think, when you start reading the book to think about how these two young women are gonna find their way to each other, you
Yeah.
know?
Especially when that physical distance grows.
Yes.
Yeah. I I want to talk about that ending in a way that doesn't spoil anything, and that's really difficult.
Good luck. Let's see.
But for most, like you said, hope, right? To
Yeah.
me, I'm coming from sci-fi fantasy, so
Yeah.
in my head, I'm like, this is feeling really dystopian
Yeah.
for a long time. And
Yes.
then it starts feeling like solar punk. I don't know if you're familiar with that genre.
Mm-mm.
It's like
What
the
is it?
it's like the reverse of dystopian novels where it's like things are okay and we're
Mm-hmm.
using technology to feel better and
Mm.
like we're one with nature and everything's gonna like work communally instead of like this sort of oligarchy or like capitalistic kind of notion.
Yeah.
And it felt like that with the Vargas sisters. Like they were so cool. Um, so did you have them in mind, the Vargas sisters, to bring that feeling in, or you just knew the feeling was gonna happen?
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking a lot about, first of all, like intergenerational storytelling, which for me, I've always had older women as models in my life, in
Mm,
my own family, through work. And so I was thinking a lot about what do we do with wealth, because the book is also really concerned with wealth and class. And I was thinking about, just thinking in some ways about Spain as like this colonizer, and
yeah,
like, what do you do with these two sisters who are Spanish, right? And they're kind of on the fringes because they're also Black women. Um, and I was just thinking about the complications of like corporate interests, and one of them comes from like oil and the other
yeah.
one comes from like hedge funds, so we're talking about probably like the worst industries in the world, right, that are causing the most harm. And so I was thinking a lot about like, how do you re-envision what it means for someone to have made like dirty money,
Yeah,
and like how that dirty money can be a source of repair in the world. I mean, again, it's like you created the wound, you come and clean it up,
yeah,
right? And so there was a part of me that I was like very invested in trying to think about these two women who have been retired, women who probably made very different choices in their lives earlier on, but when we're meeting them for the purposes of this story, they really are like this source of gentle
yeah,
nurturing for Laura. They see her, they see the ways that she has changed and become like less humane.
yeah,
And they are also like, for me, this kind of optimism for the future, that they can create kind of a pathway for some of the characters in the book to just re-examine the choices they're making and maybe offer them a different path. Now, Laura, Elena, they might not take that path, but I wanted there to be, in the absence of family and in the absence of people who will help us, I'm always thinking about like, how does the world work to
yeah,
create like a pathway for us, to create a way? And in my experience, it's been made families.
yeah,
It's usually like the people we meet, the people we encounter, and not by blood always, like the people who have been the most beneficial to my growth. And so I wanted to also give a nod to that. Like you're saying, the complications of the way that we grow and the way that we fail, and like, who is it that has the power and the means to create a possibility for repair.
One thing that was really admiring about this book is its concern with climate change. Like from the beginning, we were told that the vintage in France won't for like wine won't be exported that year because of the heat.
Mm.
And then throughout the book, we get more storms and more storms.
Mm.
I was curious about your process or your concern with climate change in this book, if you knew that was a concern right away.
Yeah, I mean, I am someone that's like really alarmed by just where we are with the climate crisis.
Yeah,
And I think as someone who grew up in the Caribbean, I feel like when we talk about the heat belt, we understand that the people who are going to suffer the most are the people that are in like the most vulnerable positions. And so I was thinking a lot about the resort as this kind of, like a terrible place that is so beautiful, but that it's like made of glass. It's like terrible to heat, it's like terrible to cool and creates more heat in the world. So that was one of the reasons why the hotel itself is just like stunningly beautiful. It's all glass and mirrors, which is terrible for the environment. And I also wanted for, in the book, there's a hurricane that happens, and it's like the worst hurricane that has ever happened. And we just experienced, right, in the last couple of weeks, Hurricane Melissa.
yeah,
And we know that that was like the worst hurricane. So just even that idea that like the storms are going to get worse, that the people that are vulnerable will be more vulnerable. And also like thinking about what's the corporate responsibility for these hotels that are there. So yeah, thank you so much for seeing that,
yeah.
because I feel like sometimes, everybody gets so caught up up in the two sisters and the drama of the tension, especially because we know that there's like two missing little girls who are also sisters in the story. And so it was just really important for me to like touch on this really critical moment, especially for the Caribbean. So thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, it was great. I was also really curious about your use of perspective in this book. I love playing with perspective in my writing, and I feel like it's one of the most challenging but fun in like ways that you could be unique about it. And I will say right now, this is a very unique use of perspective. We get more than 8 perspective characters, and I was so like, wow, like this feels so epic, right? And we even get plural perspectives where like the characters speak from a we, like we the workers, we X, Y, Z. How did that come about? Did you know that you were going to include this many perspectives?
I'm curious about what perspectives you like to write in.
Yeah, I've written from the we before, but I don't think I could have pulled it off the way you did. It was so cool. And the fact that we revisit, and I've written from non-human perspective, that's like my favorite for some reason. I've written from like the perspective of a door, from a chess piece, like all sentient character, from like a skeleton. Yeah, that's for where I've written.
Yeah, I mean, I love perspective. I feel like one of the things that I think it's like the best way to connect a reader to a story is through the use of perspective. And what's so interesting is that when I started writing this book, I remember thinking like, I don't want to write from a lot of characters' perspectives because those books make me crazy. Like I hate when I read a book and it's like 20 people and like you don't even know why the hell some of these people are in the story. Like they are almost like throwaway. But because I know I wanted to write a book that was concerned with community, I really couldn't get away from this idea that like it had to be multiphonic.
Yeah.
I was like, this has to be a book that is concerned with different people and making their way through a really hostile environment, And so, yeah, so I was thinking a lot about the use of the third person, thinking a lot about how do I use like this kind of sense of like what you're talking about, the epic, where like just make it broader. Because the other thing that bothers me a lot about literature is that very often what is considered epic is an individual making their way through a journey and they transforming. And I think that is like rooted in this same kind of elitism.
Yeah.
Because for most of us, like the truly epic stories are community stories, are like stories concerned with like families and people and not an individual, so I wanted that, and that's part of the reason why I really pushed the perspective in this book. That means a lot to me. I mean, I think I'm so glad we're talking about this because you're in your graduate program now and like working on stories in the classroom. And I just remember going through graduate school and feeling like if you can nail perspective, if you can really learn how to use the point of view to tell a story that feels complete, then you've really mastered something important.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for sitting down with me. It was so nice meeting you and getting to talk to you and just like reading your book. It was so good.
This has been such a lovely conversation, Ramon. Thank you for having me. Thank you for the care that you took with reading the book. I feel like you and I have talked about aspects of this book that I have not spoken to anybody else about. And it's so heartwarming, especially as a writer. Coming into my second book, I was so nervous about some of the risks that I took. So thank you. Thank you for your kindness.
Gracias, gracias.
Thank you.
Vamos a un chin. Y buen provecho.
You did great.
Yeah, my hands are really sweaty.
Oh, we gotta do it again.